the signal, yeah.
Right. Hello, I'm Litmus again. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming back, those who were here earlier. And if you just arrived, welcome. If you have just arrived, you've missed all the explanations, so you won't have a bloody clue what I'm talking about, okay? So, tough. But if that is the case, don't worry, because I have a website called projectfreeman.com, and everything I'm showing in any of my talks, every slide I show is on my website, okay? So don't worry if you miss something now. You don't need to take notes or anything. You can just go to projectfreeman.com and check it all out with a beer or whatever later, okay? So anyway, before the break, I told you about how I tested all the law using the method of reporting war crimes, reporting the government for war crimes, which proved that the state does not abide by its own law system. And then I was getting into explaining about testing some of these, what we call Freeman remedies to debt and things like this, that you will find, if you do searches on the internet, Freeman on the land and that, you will start to see some of these ideas. We briefly looked at parking tickets, and Simon mentioned those as well, if you were here for his talk just now. I tested that out, as I showed you, and the next one I tested out is a thing called This Is Not Me. So this is like a temporary measure before you claim your person, if that's what you decide to do. But basically, if you get a claim against you from a debt collection agency, you can basically do this. And what you do is you write in red letters, "This is not me," through the name of your legal fiction, and you send it back to whoever sent it to you. I've done this on the envelope. You can, if you've opened the envelope by mistake, forgetting that you're a human and not a legal fiction, you can do this on the letter and write it through the name on the letter and send it back. Okay? So I didn't believe this one, but when I started all this, and I thought I'd check it out and try it. So basically, I had a debt collection agency chase payment of a water bill from a house I lived at 3 years previously, and all the bills had been paid. Basically, all that had happened was a bad debt had got transferred to an agency before it had been settled, and then when it had been settled, the agency in question at the time didn't tell the original company, so it went out to another debt collection agency who tried to get exactly the same amount. And this has happened again since, by the way. So what I did, I got their letter, I wrote "This is not me" through the legal fiction, and having had a lot of phone calls and a lot of letters demanding this, that and the other, I sent one back with "This is not me" on, and I never heard another thing. All the letters stopped, and obviously I didn't part with any fiat currency or vouchers, as we call them. So you can try this. If you got someone like this and you know you're in the right and you know about your legal fiction stuff, try this one. It worked for me. I also actually did it on a vehicle license V5 form reminder when I was transferring ownership of a vehicle, or sorry, registered keeper of a vehicle. And when the new form came back, they'd still put the name on the new form, but because I hadn't used the postcode and I put "This is not me" through the legal fiction, it came back as unknown address. So they still had a company name, but they didn't know where to locate it, if you like. And as I say, it worked on a debt collection agency. So give that one a try. It worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. That's just a little brief one, but now I want to get onto the meaty one, if you like. Credit cards. So I think any free man believes that these are legalized fraud. So I thought I'd check it out. Now, before I tell you how I discharge credit card debt, I just want to explain the background to this by taking you through some of Her Majesty's finances, okay? So we're going to look at Her Majesty's finances for the territory known as the UK Crown Territory, which is administered for her by her Treasury. And at this point, I would also like to introduce you to a little clip from a film called The International, which perfectly explains the issue of war that we looked at and debt that we're about to look at. So the link between war and debt. We got a feed on that one?
Worth of missile guidance and control systems from your company.
Right, I'm going to see if I can take that back. Run it again from the start. Right.
Mr. Calvini, we'd like to know why the IBBC, a bank, would be purchasing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of missile guidance and control systems from your company.
The IBBC has purchased billions of dollars worth of Silkworm missiles from the People's Republic of China, which they have resold to clients in the Middle East, contingent upon the missiles being equipped with Vulcan guidance systems. My company is one of only 2 in the world which produce the Vulcan.
Who's the other?
Sunay. Ahmed Sunay.
Of Turkish Aerotech.
But why is the bank committing so much of its capital and resources to the sale of these missiles?
It's a test. Small arms are the only weapons used in 99% of the world's conflicts. And no one has the capacity to manufacture them faster and cheaper than China. What Skarsen is attempting to do is to make the IBBC the exclusive broker of Chinese small arms to the Third World. And the missile deal is the gateway transaction.
Yeah, but billions of dollars invested simply to be a broker. There can't be that much profit for them.
No, this is not about making profit from weapon sales. It's about control.
Control the flow of weapons, control the conflict.
No. No, the IBBC is a bank. Their objective isn't to control the conflict. It's to control the debt that the conflict produces. You see, the real value of a conflict, the true value, is in the debt that it creates. You control the debt, you control everything. You find this upsetting, but this is the very essence of the banking industry. To make us all, whether we be nations or individuals, slaves to debt.
Okay, I put that in because I don't know if any of you remember, but there was a famous case a few years back. A guy called Nick Leeson, insider trading the BCCI Bank, Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and this is what he was doing. He was brokering arms deals and stuff, and using bank funds to do it, to basically encourage conflict. Because if you have a conflict, you end up with both sides buying arms, massive debt, and the bank benefits from the interest it gets paid on the debt at the end. So that little clip from that great film, actually, check that film out if you haven't seen it. That kind of summarizes the whole thing about why war and debt go together. So when I was starting to look at, I'd looked at the war, and I knew the state didn't abide by its own law under war, as we've seen earlier. And when I started looking at credit cards, I started looking at the whole debt issue and sort of found this link. So just to illustrate that, I want to look at income tax. Right, the column on the left, this is this year's budget. This is what the government will get in income tax from you guys, okay? 158 billion. And they will spend 90 billion on, they'll spend 40 billion on the military and 50 billion on interest on the debt, on the national debt. Okay, so just those two things account for nearly 60% of your income tax. So if you're working and paying income tax, 60% of it is just paying to kill people and bail out banks. Okay, this is why I stopped paying tax. So that's the sort of puts it in a nutshell, really. And if we look at Her Majesty's debt, because don't forget it's not your debt. When I started this project, I showed you this earlier. The public net sector debt was 614 billion, and the interest on that was 28 billion a year. Already now, the interest is 50 billion a year. Okay, so you can see where it's heading, and if you follow that projection, it won't be long before the pro rata debt interest will be nearly 100 billion a year. So either that, or basically they will just be paying it for longer and longer and longer. So this is the sort of background to the whole thing. And what Her Majesty's government does once it's got all this debt created by war and bailing out banks, amongst other things, it sells it as what it calls gilts. So these are called gilt-edge securities, and they're gilt-edged because they're government securities on which interest payments and final repayments are guaranteed, okay? So if you buy debt under gilts, you're guaranteed to get the interest. So it's the highest rating of safety for an investor. So I rung the Bank of England about this, and I spoke to a guy called Roger Beaton, and I got him to confirm this happens, and I said, how is it that the payments are guaranteed? And he said, well, it's because they're paid for by tax. So the interest is paid by tax. And I said, well, what if we don't pay tax? What if there's no tax, or not enough tax? He said, oh, well, the government will just raise taxes. Okay, so just like that. Well, they just raise taxes, no problem. So this is what's going on. If you look at the debt, the real size of it, this is the projected debt, the public sector debt, over 2 trillion, the bar in red on the left. Right, the GDP of the whole country for 1 year is the green bit. So I call that Her Majesty's turnover. So that's everything the country produces, or this corporation that they call the country. So as you can see, there's no way, even if we gave all the money, if you like, wealth created in 1 year, it still wouldn't go any way to paying off the debt. Now the blue bit is roughly what she gets in tax for this territory. Okay, so a third of everything produced in the territory goes as tax to Her Majesty's government. And then that picture there on the right, that's the gold in the Bank of England. Okay, so that's a picture of all the gold. So that used to be, what backed the currency, but it doesn't anymore. So 72 billion quid's worth at the moment of gold. Okay, so that's the only thing of any value in the Bank of England. So see how big the debt is, 2 trillion, and all there is to pay it off is, I thought, 72 billion, right? That little bit in yellow. Okay, so that's the state of the problem, if you like. But it gets worse, because the public net sector debt is only one little bit of it, and that's the bit in blue on the bottom of this chart, the dark blue bit. Now, if you add in all the bailout of the banks and the taxpayer liabilities on pensions and loans and guarantees and tax cuts and everything else, it's actually 4.3 trillion. And the only mainstream media to cover this at all was a program on Channel 4 about a year ago, who actually quoted this figure of 4.3 trillion. It's the only place I've ever seen it referred to in the mainstream. And they call this taxpayer liability, okay? It's not. It's Her Majesty's debt, okay? You don't have to pay it. But that's what you think you have to do. So what I did, I wrote under the Freedom of Information request to the Treasury, asking them what they did with the tax money and what they did with the gold in the Bank of England and how they thought they might pay off the debt if need be. And I got a letter back, and amongst other things, it says the reserves in the Bank of England do not offset the national debt, but were established in 1932 to provide a fund that could be used to regulate the exchange value of sterling. Okay, so there are no reserves at all to cover the debt. So what you find is the debt is secured against our persons as surety, because those legal entities are the entities through which they collect the tax on our labour to pay the interest on the debt. Now, when an organisation is trading in this manner, i.e. it's got massive debt, no reserves, but it's continuing to operate, it's actually operating in a state of administration or bankruptcy, because on the grace of its creditors, because if the creditors call in the debt and it can't be paid, basically the company is liquidated. So if you look at the Insolvency Act of 1986, it talks about administration. Basically, if a company is in that state, an administrator is appointed, who's an officer of the court and an agent for the company, not personally liable, and this guy works on behalf of the creditors, okay? And the first thing he'll try and do is attempt to run that organization as a going concern. And if he does that, further liquidity must come from the existing creditors, okay? If that doesn't work, ultimately the thing gets liquidated and all the assets get distributed amongst the creditors. So if we all stop paying tax and they can't pay the debt, basically the country will be liquidated, the corporation, and we'll share it all out between us. So I say that's what will happen. I have no doubt about that. Now I just want to show you the state. Was anyone here for Simon's talk just now? He talked about money and how it's not real. Right, let's have a look at the money in the UK. Right, this is all the currency, the fiat currency in circulation. So you've got a little bit, there's 3.6 here. That's 3.6 billion of coins, okay, and they're made by the Royal Mint, okay. Then you've got 51 and a bit billion in banknotes printed by the Bank of England, and then you've got 2.2 trillion, funny enough, that number keeps coming up, which is bank credit. So this is loans from banks, which all has interest on it. So 97.5% of our so-called money supply is actually bank credit with interest. And that is in circulation. So when you get paid, that's what you're getting paid with, pretty much. When you go to the cash point and draw out some notes, you're using the 51 billion of notes. But anything else that's electronic is in this other bit. So there is no money. It's just numbers on a screen, and it all has interest. So if you try and use this money to pay off a debt, you're paying off a debt with money which has interest, which is adding to the debt. So you've got to stop trying to pay debts off, okay, people? So if you get a demand saying you have to pay a debt, you can't do it, because all you're going to do is add to the debt. Okay? Everyone clear on that one? So just a little summary there. There's no money, there's only debt. And the debt is created, the money, if you like, is created from the promises to pay. So when you sign a document saying you'll pay that back with interest, that's when this money comes into existence. But debt is a slow death for the world, and we need to get out of that. Now, there's a load more on my website about this, and it shows how the Chancellor of the Exchequer is actually an administrator working on behalf of the banks. Okay, if it goes back to 1869. So check that out, that's all on the web. I haven't got time to go into it now, but it's on the website. So, what we need to do, we talked about the different types of law earlier, and Simon covered this. And you've got common law and equity and commerce and civil law and all the rest of it. The thing is, when we have claims of debt against our person, we have to discharge them rather than pay them. So we can't pay our debts at law because, as I've shown you, that will increase the debt because all money is created with interest. So what we have to do is discharge our claims in equity, and that will actually reduce the debt. So for example, if you have a credit card, what that enables you to do is actually go and collect goods which have real value that you can do things with, like washing machines, say, or whatever it is. Maybe you can think of many examples. And then what you need to do. Now, I'm not saying you all need to do this. This is what A. Freeman did: is max out all his credit cards and then discharge the debt. So, how you do that is by understanding the contract structure. So any contract to be binding has to be mutually agreed, it has to be supported by consideration on both parties, and that just means something of value. So both sides have to give something of value. Now the contract may contain obligations which are implied by statute, and it can be, so that's the top right bit. Bottom left, the contract is discharged because it is frustrated by an intervening event. Okay. And the contract is also valid if there is nothing to vitiate the contract and render it void or voidable by one party. So if you find there is an event which frustrates this contract, if you find there isn't consideration by both parties, if you find there has been no mutual agreement, or any of those other things there, the contract is not valid. Okay? And this applies to all credit card contracts. They're all fraudulent. None of them are valid contracts. So what a Freeman did was send a proof of claim notice to each of the credit card companies. And failure to prove the claim means the debt is void, okay? So I asked for validation of the debt, and you can see templates for this online, and there's now what my sort of final version, if you like, having done it a few times, my finished version's on my website, so you can have a look at that. But basically you ask for validation of the debt, and they have to show the actual accounting from their books showing that they've lost something, they've given you something, and they can't do that because they create it out of thin air, and that's their consideration. So they've given no consideration, so that's invalid. They have to verify their claim via a sworn affidavit or a hand-signed invoice under the Bill of Exchange Act 1882. So that's the obligation implied by statute. And they need to show you a copy of the contract signed by both parties. Okay, now you as a human didn't sign anything, and you probably got a contract in the post that was pre-signed by some entity you've never met, you don't know who it is, you don't even know if they exist. So they can't send you that either. Now I did this, I had a credit card with MBNA, I had one with Egg, and one with the Co-op Bank. And I quite liked the Co-op Bank, you know, they're kind of ethical a bit and cuddly and that. But they're still part of this system. But I sent these proof of claims notices to these companies and discharged £28,000 of credit card debt. And I sent 2 letters like this to each of the companies, and I never heard from them again. Whatever they do, I mean, the point is they stopped writing to me and trying to chase me. So obviously I can't stand here and give you advice legally about what to do, but all I'm saying is a Freeman, like me, did this, and this is the result. And you can have a look at the templates on the website. So a Freeman takes any money on deposit out of the banks, and this is what I've done. I don't use banks anymore. I've got one account left with a nationwide building society, because it's the only one still that's a building society, I think. And any money that people want to pay electronically goes into that, and then my point man here in the UK takes that out, converts it into euros, and posts it to me in France. Okay, so I don't use banks anymore. I only use cash. And cash is just vouchers of exchange, yeah, between people. And I try and use them only between other people, so I try not to use them with organizations. And obviously trade with barter. So I'll go and play in a market, play guitar in a market, and people give me food, like hunks of bread and cheese and stuff. So that's cool, because the tax man's not involved anyway. And, you know, personally, if I could get another credit card, I'd go and max it out and then discharge it, and then help to reduce the debt. It's the best way of doing it. Now, the knowledge, when you study this stuff and you understand how contracts work, you'll find that everything is done in commerce under a contract, whether it be with the NHS, with the police, with a holiday company, with the Royal Mail. And I've had real life examples of this where people have tried to, if you like, bully me into submitting to things. I've used my knowledge of how the contract thing works, and I haven't got time to go through all these, I'm sorry, but basically it works. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in this stuff at all, you need to study how the contracts work. Well worth it. Okay, that's the end of that section. And maybe we can do questions on that in the forum, if you've got any, so that we can cover the rest of the stuff. Is that cool? Right. So I'm just going to load up my next talk. Right, so having researched the theory and tested it all out, what I then moved into was actually implementing it and using it as protest against war and debt. So I just want to take you through some of that. So we're now looking at this protest phase where the main bit I'm going to cover is stop paying tax, the bottom bit, okay? So my status while I'm doing this, I'm still in the system, but I'm protesting within the system, okay? So I still have a registered person, but I'm aware of my true nature. And I choose, it's up to me when I want to choose to act as an agent for that legal fiction or not. So if I can use it to benefit something in a good way, I'll use it. If not, I don't use it. It's up to me, and it's up to everyone to do that. You have to give consent to be bound by statutes, for example. So if you understand how the system works, you can use it, for the good of everyone rather than the way it is at the moment. So I just want to run you through how I went about stop paying tax because of the war and the debt. Now, the recommendation from the Make Wars History site that I mentioned earlier is that you withhold your income tax. But when I wrote to the Treasury asking them what they do with the tax money, they said in general revenues are pooled in the consolidated fund, and that then basically they're not split up. So you think you pay road tax, it pays for roads, etc., and you pay national insurance, it pays for the NHS. It doesn't. It all goes in one big pot called the consolidated fund, and they can do what they like with it. So if you want to make sure you're not going to pay for war or interest on debt, you have to stop paying all tax because it all goes in one big pot. So the main three are income tax, council tax, and vehicle license duty, which is what it's called. Now, the way you stop paying tax, the way I stopped paying tax was to send notices. So it's called, and this is from the work of Robert Arthur Menard of Canada, the common law stuff. So you can check that out. But it's called a notice of understanding and intent and a claim of right. And it needs all these elements. So you need to address it to the most senior contact of the corporation that you're dealing with. So the chief executive of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, for example. You need to head it up without prejudice. You need to then summarize your understanding of the situation, tell them what you intend to do about it, claim your rights to do that under whatever law you think is relevant. Then you give them a notice period for challenges to that. Be reasonable, don't give 3 days, give something reasonable like 21 days or whatever. And then you also tell them that if they don't make valid counterclaim against your understanding, that you claim estoppel, which is the end of the matter. And then the bit that I've done a bit differently, if you like, to what I found elsewhere on the internet is to tell them how you want to be addressed in the reply. So tell them that if they want to write to you, they need to write to your human man or woman and your proper name, John of the family Smith. And if they don't do that, you will either ignore it or return it back to them unopened. So you're being honourable, you're telling them how you wish to be addressed, and you're giving them plenty of notice. So if they don't do that, you're perfectly entitled to do as you say you will. And then you sign it off. I've actually created my own new Freeman mark, which I use for my human man on correspondence, and I keep my old signature that I've used all my life for my legal fiction. And that's just something I've done, and it seems to work. I'm not sure I've seen that anywhere else, but it seems to work. So but try it, give it a whirl, see how you get on. So you send that off, and if nothing valid comes back, you claim estoppel, which is a bar that prevents. This is a law dictionary, a bar that prevents one from asserting a claim or right that contradicts what one has said or done before, or what has been legally established as true. So you're legally establishing what's true, and if they don't challenge it with a valid counterclaim, you can claim estoppel, and then it prevents any further litigation. So I do that when they haven't actually responded to my notice. So I sent one of these to the Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And of course, this was all about income tax. But what I first want to quickly explain is the whole thing about, I mean, do you have to actually pay tax in the first place? We all think we do. But this all goes back to the registration of the birth. So the registration of the birth creates the person, the legal entity, and that is the thing that pays tax and is bound by statutes. But if you look at the Births, Deaths and Registration Act of 1953, which is still the current act about registering birth, do you actually have to register? So if you look at that, if you actually read it, it talks about persons in the plural rather than people, which is a giveaway. But it says that every child born in England and Wales shall be registered. It doesn't say they must be registered or, you know, that you have to do it. It just says they shall be registered by the registrar. And then it says, strike one, it says it shall be the duty. And duty means work performed as part of one's job. So it doesn't apply to non-employees, all right? Don't forget, duty is also a government tax on imports, but it says it shall be the duty of every father and mother to register the birth within 42 days, okay? That's what that bit says. So if you don't do it within 42 days, you might get a notice. So after 42 days, the registrar may send you a notice saying, you know, you haven't registered you haven't birthed your new ship in my dock, basically. You've then got 3 months. So after 3 months, that's strike two. If you didn't register, you might get another notice. And then the next bit says, where after the 12 months from the date of the birth of the child, the birth has not been registered, the birth shall not be registered. Okay? So if you wait a year, that's it. You don't have to register. Now, the only penalty in that situation is if someone then tries to register the birth and it's more than 3 months, they'll get a penalty for being late. This is what it says. Okay? And this is, again, this isn't hidden away anywhere. This is all on the legislation.gov.uk website. You can go and look at all this and read it yourself. Now, I thought there must be a penalty, surely. There must be a penalty, you know, on this person if they don't create another person. Right? So I looked at the penalty section, and it says, if you fail to give the information, you will be liable on summary conviction, the person will, to a fine not exceeding £2 for each offence, okay? So if your person doesn't register a new person, you might get a £2 fine, right? Now, I went through 3 pages of legislation amendments to this act from 1953 up to 2009. But I was doing it in my camper van in a nice little village in the mountains in France with my dog and the son, so it was good. But I went through 3 pages of legislation, and that has not been amended, that clause. So if you don't register, you might be fined very heavily, okay? £2. Check it out. Now, the other thing this act says, in section 28, it mentions directions of the minister. Okay, and in section 39, it says the Registrar General may, with the approval of the minister, blah, blah, blah. So you think, well, who is this minister that they're talking about? Who does registration of birth come under in the government? Well, if you go on the website, government website, the agency responsible for registration of birth is the General Register Office. Okay, and then if you search where that sits in government, it tells you that it sits in the Identity and Passport Service, which is part of the Home Office. Okay? So you would think the minister referred to in the Registration of Births Act would be the Home Secretary. Would you agree? Yeah? Does that make sense? The minister responsible. But if you look at section 41 of the Act, it tells you that the minister means the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So the minister responsible for this new entity that you're creating is the Chancellor. Well, of course it is, because that means he can tax you, through your legal fiction, and generate lots of revenue and use your person as surety against Crown debt and all the other things. So there you go. There's another bit of proof, if you like. So don't forget, this was all a preamble to telling you how you serve notice on HMRC not to pay tax, okay? So, what about putting a tax return in, okay? Say if you're employed, your employers take your tax straight to source, yeah? But if you're self-employed, you put a tax return in. And people will tell you, if you don't put a tax return in, you'll get sent to prison, like it's fraud and all this kind of thing. But if you look up fraud, it says a knowing misrepresentation of the truth, concealment of a material fact to induce another to act to his or her detriment. Okay, so it's basically not doing what you say and putting someone else in stuck for it. And it says fraud is a civil wrong, okay, but in some cases, if the conduct is willful, it may be a crime, okay? So if you look up civil fraud and criminal fraud, what it actually says is, definition number 2, tax. So it's actually, civil fraud in the law book is defined as tax, and it says an intentional but not willful evasion of taxes, okay? Yeah, everyone got that? So it's the distinction between an intentional and willful fraud. Now that's not always clear, but the point is civil fraud only carries a monetary penalty, okay? So all they can do is attempt to fine you. But if you look at criminal fraud, this also says tax. And it says the willful evasion of taxes accomplished by filing a fraudulent tax return. All right? So if you put a tax return in and knowingly cook the books so that you don't pay any tax, you're committing criminal fraud and you can go to prison. But if you don't put a tax return in at all, it's only a civil issue and they'll try and fine you, and that's it. Now, if they try and fine you, the fine gets paid, if you read the Act, it gets paid into the Consolidated Fund, which may be used for war and debt. So you can't pay that either. Okay? Now, I've put this in all my notices. I say I can't pay tax because I'm breaking the International Criminal Court by aiding and abetting an illegal act of genocide. Yeah? So I'm serving notice I can't pay tax to remain law-abiding. And in order to accomplish that, I'm not going to put a tax return in because that is only a civil issue. And then I can't pay the fine that you will attempt to fine me because it goes in the Consolidated Fund and may be used for, and you go round in a circle. And I've said I'll happily go to court and discuss this, but so far I'm yet to be taken to court, or invited to court rather. And this is what I've done. So I sent a notice to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, January 2010, with a covering letter explaining everything, and then a detailed notice. And this is all on the website, so if you want to see what I wrote, you can download it on the website. And it basically explains the whole issue and explains why I can no longer pay income tax. I didn't hear from them within my notice period, so I sent an estoppel notice, 23rd of Feb, saying that your notice period has expired and you failed to dispute or present valid counterclaim to my argument. So I'm claiming estoppel by acquiescence, and I reminded them if they want to write to me, they have to write to the human man, not the legal fiction. Now, interestingly, crafty buggers, I then, 26th of March, I got a handwritten envelope. Now, I'd said to them, if you don't want to write John of the family Smith, you can write John : Smith, because colon in this case represents of the family, okay? So I get this handwritten envelope with my first name as given at birth and a colon, family name, and handwritten. So obviously, I opened that to read what was in it. But when I looked at the letter inside, it was still incorrectly addressed, and it was salutated, dear Mr. whatever. So all its content was invalid. under my previous notice. It made no reference to the legal issues I raised. It threatened liability and legal obligations. It disputed my right to change my name, as it called it. And it said if I wanted to do that, I had to do it by deed poll, because don't forget, a birth certificate is a deed showing transfer of title of ownership of the child from the family to the state. And that if I was claiming it was a corporation name, I needed to show the deed of incorporation. So this is what this letter said. But of course, all its content was invalid. So I didn't respond to it. I'd already sent a stopple, and I haven't paid any tax since, or put a tax return in. So that's that one. Then there's the council tax. Now this is notice to the local authority, okay? So this started October 2009. But again, do we have to actually pay council tax? Before we get into like how you go about stop paying it, do you have to actually pay it in the first place? Well, this all goes back to your registered address. And this is covered by the Local Government Finance Act of 92, all right? So there's songs coming soon, guys. Stay awake, okay? We have to go through some of this stuff, all right? But, you know, we all need to read this stuff because it opens up your eyes so much. Right. Now, if you read this Local Government Finance Act 1992, it tells you who's liable, and it talks about dwellings and residents. Now, the tax is levied on the dwelling, and that they use that because it's a legal definition again, and it's a place of residence. One of the reasons they use it is because they can say it includes boats and mobile homes. But if you look at the definition of a residence, it's one of the definitions is a place where a corporation is registered to do business. Okay, so don't forget your person is a corporation. The residence is where it's where it's registered to do business. And then you've got the word resident used in this act. Okay, now if you look up the term resident in legalese, it actually says this is not necessarily a citizen. And in English, it says it's someone living at a place in order to carry out a job, a resident person. All right. So you can read that and interpret that none of those things apply to you as a human. It also says that the person is liable, and again, the word resident is used throughout. So it says a person falls within this subsection if, you know, he is a resident of the dwelling, blah, 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 if he is a resident and has a leasehold. So it goes down in hierarchy. Now, this says he all the way through. So I thought, hang on, don't women have to pay this then? Is it only men? But I thought, nah, they're not going to let us get away with that, are they? Otherwise, we'd all start wearing dresses and stuff and call ourselves Shirley, you know. So, and again, it uses persons as a plural all the way through. So what I did, I thought, hang on a minute, I wonder, because I'd never looked. I wonder if there's a definition of he in the Black's Law Dictionary. And I do have one here, so if anyone wants to check this, you can. But this is what it says. He, a pronoun of the masculine gender traditionally used and construed in statutes to include both sexes as well as corporations. Okay? So when you read in about the person and he and the resident and the dwelling, it's all talking about corporations called legal fictions. So you are not bound by this at all, in my view, based on my research. Now, interestingly, if anyone knows a bit of French, because all the law used to be in French after the Norman Conquest, if you speak French, you use il for it. So you use the he noun for it as well. And you can see that in this case, it's referring to a corporation. So I was pretty convinced that none of this was relevant to me as a flesh and blood man. So I sent notice to my local authority, because what I actually did was I did a bill of sale and sold. I lived on a houseboat, okay, which is like a house. So basically, I sold my place of residence to my children for £10. They each give me the money, and we all signed the bill of sale, and we had it with, and they're now the lawful owners of the property, which means it can't be seized from me to settle any outstanding debts as well. So I wrote to the council saying I'm no longer the lawful owner. I told them my new postal address, which was a P.O. box, and said that they must address me correctly, and that any incorrectly addressed, you got it by now, haven't you? Will be returned unopened and unread. All right. So then I got one of these letters to the occupier shoved through the door. A later date. I wasn't actually living there anymore at this point, but it's the register of electors. So, asking politely for information and then saying that the information is required by law for you to register that every person who's living at that premises. But it doesn't tell you which law you're obliged to give them the info under. And it makes a mild threat of there's up to £1,000 fine if you don't give them the information. So most people think, oh shit, I better tell them what they want to know, and then they'll go away and leave me alone. So here's the form that came with the letter. Again, it says it's required by law, but it doesn't tell you which one. Now, when you fill that in capital letters, and admit to being a legal fiction and sign it in your human hand, you've just created joinder and you've agreed to represent that legal entity, and that is the business that is being taxed at that premises because it's the business residence. And the way they trick you into doing it is by saying, if you do this, you'll get a vote and you'll have a stake in society and you'll be able to pick the democratically elected government which will look after all your rights. Yeah, right. But if you look into the whole issue of, do you want to vote in the first place? A Freeman says no, because there's no law requiring you to do it, although councils say there is. They dangle benefits of, they dangle the carrots of these benefits like voting. But if you look at the first past the post system, and of course this is quite topical recently because the change to the vote got thrown out, the change to the voting structure, which is crazy. But when you register to vote, you're confirming that you're agreeing to represent that person at that residence. Now, a Freeman also should ignore all politicians, the banksters, whores. And you don't want to endorse a rigged system. Now, I'm just going to show you how rigged this system is, all right? Just based on the actual stats. So this is the 2005 election when Labour got in, all right? So you got 61 million people in the country on the left. Next one, 44 million of them are eligible to vote. At that election, only 27 million actually voted, of which 17 million voted for everyone else, and 9.6 million voted for Labour, which was the government that got in. So 16% of the population voted for the government, and they call that democracy, which is meant to be majority rule, I think. That's another issue, by the way. But now, if you look at the last election, when what they call them, the condemns, or whatever they got in, you find what they always show you on the news and stuff is the share of the vote. So you think, oh, the one who got most votes got in, so that's fair, So this is what it was: 29 Labour, 36% Tory, blah blah blah. But if you look at the share of the electorate, right, the people who can vote, this is how it looks. So the biggest chunk of people in the electorate are the ones who didn't vote for anyone. They're saying they're either apathetic or they're saying I don't believe in this system. So that is the majority. So I vote for the majority being none of the above. Okay, let's get rid of the government and do something properly. So there's not a lot of point, in my view, in registering to vote anyway, because you're just perpetuating this crazy system. And although they tell you that we live in a democracy, don't forget, we actually officially are in a constitutional monarchy, and the United States is a republic, but they keep talking about democracy. What we've actually got is an oligarchy, or at best, or a monarchy dictatorship, where you've got a few powerful people at the top running the whole thing. But they claim it to be democracy. So that's worth checking out. Now, so I sent my to the council saying I wasn't the lawful owner, I'm not going to pay the tax anymore, etc. So they sent an inspector around. So I happened to be at my houseboat one day, and this guy called Steve came bouncing down the gangplank, in April 2010. So I thought, oh, I'm gonna have some fun now. So I went outside. I said, hello, are you? And he said, are you the owner? Didn't say hello or how are you or anything. He just said, are you the owner? And I said, well, no, I'm not actually. Quite honestly, I wasn't the owner. He said, well, who are the owners? They're not paying their tax. I said, well, before we do anything, I can't talk to you unless I can prove who you are. So, and he was very officious and intimidating. So I asked him for his ID to verify his person. And then I asked him for a phone to call the number that he'd given me to verify his ID. And you're perfectly entitled to do this, by the way. This is step number 1 if you get a bailiff or anything. It's not up to you to pay for the call to prove who he's claiming to be. It's up to him. And he couldn't give me a phone. Then he said, well, haven't you got a phone? I said, no, there's no landline. He said, haven't you got a mobile? I said, no. And anyway, why should I use my phone to find out who you are when you're threatening me? So I said I couldn't prove his ID, so I was no longer going to discuss the matter with him, not give him any information. And he says, are you refusing to give me this information? I said, well, what if I could prove who you are, I could discuss the matter with you, and you stick to your guns. He got really frustrated and stroppy, and then he sodded off, basically. But you politely, I politely declined all his requests. I didn't get angry or aggressive or stroppy or anything, because he doesn't understand how this works either. That's the point. And I've never heard a thing since. And all these letters and everything, it's all on the website, so you can go through it all. And if you've got any queries, you can send me an email, okay? Right, now the third one, your vehicle or your private conveyance. So for this one, you have to send notice to the DVLA to deregister your private conveyance. All right, so let's have a look at the law about that, the legal system. So this Excise and Registration Act, 1994. What a thing to be talking about on a Friday night, eh? God, we're having a good time, aren't we? Hey, yo, what did you do Friday? Oh, I was discussing the Vehicle Excise and Registration Act. So I have read all of these acts. You can probably tell by the bags under my eyes. But if you read this one, it says that the duty is paid on the license issued for the vehicle. All right. So it says a duty of excise shall be charged in respect of every mechanically propelled vehicle, and it's not a vehicle, it's a car, which is used or kept on a public road, and shall be paid on a license to be taken out by the person keeping the vehicle. All right. So this is what you're paying the tax on. You're not paying the tax on the car. You're paying the tax on by you volunteering to take out a license to drive your own car on a road. All right, this is what is actually happening. Now, why do you need a license to drive your own private conveyance? You're not charging money. You're not gaining commercially. You're not a taxi. You don't need a license, but you think you do. License is a revocable permission, right, to commit some act that would otherwise be unlawful. And if you look in the book, it tells you this is all to do with servitude. So it was licenses issued by lords to their serfs to hunt on their land and all that kind of thing. But you don't need a license. You don't need permission to maneuver a private conveyance that you already own. But once you voluntarily register it to the state and sign ownership over to them, you're only the registered keeper and not the owner. So then you need a license. But if you look in the Act, this bit says registration of vehicles. Now it says, the Secretary of State shall on the first issue by him of a vehicle license for a vehicle, register the vehicle. So it's only when you apply for a license on a form that he registers the vehicle. And nowhere, I've been through this whole act, nowhere does it say that it's compulsory to apply for a license. It doesn't even say all persons must apply for a license. So you don't have to do it. I think you have to because you haven't read this act. This is like clicking, yes, I accept, when you download iTunes, the new version. You haven't read all the terms and conditions, and you go, yeah, I accept. And it might say in there, we're going to bend you over and do nasty things to you with various instruments without any lubrication, right? But if you haven't read it, you don't know, do you? But read it, you don't have to do it. But what you do is you go and fill out one of these, an application for a tax disc. And it even says on this form, you have to declare which class of tax you're applying for. And it says private light goods. So you voluntarily tick this box and sign it and say, I'm happy to pay to use my own car for my own private use. And then you have to pay him the tax. You don't have to fill one of these in. Okay. So, but you do, I believe, a freeman must ensure that he abides by the moral law, right? So you mustn't encroach on others. So you don't want to cause them injury or harm or loss or damage to their property. That's it under common law. So you do need some kind of insurance, I believe, or some kind of third-party indemnity, so that if you cause someone harm, you can compensate them. And you need to make sure that you're safe and roadworthy. So at the moment, you need an MOT and insurance. But I'm looking at the whole MOT issue at the moment because that's another scam, and the money goes in the consolidated fund, etc., etc. So I'm looking at a thing where you get a letter from the garage saying we've carried out all the repairs necessary to pass the MOT, but then don't pay the fee for the MOT certificate. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you leave if you look in a garage who issue MOT certificates, there's a sign on the wall, a notice, saying this certificate is no guarantee of the roadworthiness of the vehicle upon leaving this premises. Okay, so it's not worth anything anyway. But anyway, you need to be covered, I believe, but you don't want to pay the tax because it goes to war and debt. So the day before I was going to send my notice off to the DA, I got stopped by a cop called Phil, who, because I'd taken my tax disc off, I had my notice ready, he was going to go off the next day. I was going around my mate's house to watch footy in Ringham Road in Ipswich, if anyone knows that. Hello? Yes. Right, and I'm just pulling along Colwell Hall Road, and the copper lights go on, And the first time the lights go on, you think, because you've seen all these movies and TV shows all your life where the cops are after you, and the old sphincter sort of tightens up, and you think, now I'm going to actually put this into practice and see if it works. So he flagged me down, this copper. He asked for my name, and I said I claim no obligation to disclose it, and I explained to him why I didn't have tax. I said because of the war and the legal issues that I've shared with you tonight. And this guy actually said, good on you, mate. He said, I wish more people would do something like this, Stand up for what you believe in. And he checked. I had MOT and insurance, which I did. And he still wanted some ID. So I said, I'm holding documents pertaining to my former legal fiction, but this is not me. But if you wish to examine them, I will show them to you under protest and duress. All right, and then you're covered. So that's what I did. He had a look at it. He said, cool. He said, actually, mate, I've had enough of the bloody force. He said, I became a copper to protect people, and fight crime, and all I do is fill in bloody parking ticket things and send notices to the DVLA and stuff. So, but what this proved to me, and you'll find this is true if you check it out, you can't be prosecuted anyway for not having tax on your car. And if you get stopped by the cops, all they will do is send a letter to the DVLA to tell them that they've seen you driving without tax. Okay, and this is fact. This happened to me 3 times. They can. The question was, what if in the vehicle and they've towed it away because you didn't have tax? The only way they can impound your car under these statutes that they made up is if it's not insured. If it's not insured, they can impound it. You know, if you've signed it over to them and registered it and everything, because it's theirs, it's not yours. You're just a registered keeper. But they can't do it for not having tax. Okay, so again, if you read there's about 3 pieces of legislation that cover this, and you'll find that I basically, you know, proved it in real sort of situation. Yeah? Okay, maybe can we talk about that more after? Yeah? Cool. I'd like to hear about that, because I haven't come across that yet. And it may be because he doesn't understand how the system works, but... Right, so basically this copper said, you know, I'll have to send a report to the DVLA, and I said, well, they'll get my notice before they get your report, so that's cool. And off he went. And I went to watch the footy. So I sent my notice off, 25th of November, covering letter. Then the general notice to the government explaining the whole tax and war issue, and then a specific one to the DVLA giving them notice that I was reclaiming ownership of my private conveyance and that it would no longer be their property, etc., and that therefore I would no longer be paying tax on the license on it. And I got a response back, addressed to me correctly, actually, you know, as I'd asked. It noted the contents, reminded me of the statutory obligations, quoted statute law, which I put in my notice why that didn't apply, but they ignored all that. And they said the police will report you to us if they see you driving without tax, and which I know they do that. They said the DVLA will enforce it, but they didn't make any valid counterclaim to my notice to them. So I sent another notice back to them, claiming estoppel. Final notice of deregistration. I said, you failed to make valid counterclaim. I told them of my fee schedule that I would use if I got stopped unnecessarily. I claimed a low deal car, issue estoppel and equitable estoppel, and you can look those up on my website. And I claimed my right to a common law court de jure for any disputes. I said that I would carry a new mark, and here it is. No tax for war on my car, and that goes in the window. And hopefully back on here. And I got that signed by 3 witnesses as witness to the fact. Sent it back. Then they sent another response. They still didn't answer any of my queries, and they said, we interpret your letter to imply. Right? So I've got to answer this, haven't I? I've got to send another one. They're saying, you know, you might want to obtain legal advice. This woman says, we will not engage in discussion, and then enters into 2 paragraphs of discussion. And again, reminds you of your statutory obligations and the penalties. And she says, I write in clear and stark terms to avoid any doubt. And I will not enter into any further discussions. But because she said, I interpret your letter to imply, I sent another notice back to him, which put the record straight. So I took each of her points that she'd made, and I said, you have misunderstood this, and you have misinterpreted it, and I put her straight. And I went back over the issue about the war and the debt and the tax and everything else, and I claimed my right to a legal explanation. How can I lawfully abide by 2 or more conflicting statutory obligations? And I want that explained by either the DVLA, the Secretary of State, or the Attorney General, failing that. And I said I couldn't pay any penalties because they would go into the consolidated fund. And I said that unless they replied to the contrary, I would have tacit agreement to those understandings under law. And I never heard from them again. So that I deregistered a vehicle, okay? I had no further response from the DVLA. There were no further penalties sent. There was no further restriction by the police. In fact, the police used to see me driving around Ipswich with this notice in my window, and they just used to go, you know, and drive off. Because if they stop me, they can't get any money out of me. They can't find me. They can't arrest me. They can't do anything. All they got to do is they got to do more paperwork. to the DVLA, so there's no point in them stopping me, is there? It's great. And they can get on with solving crime and stuff, you know? And I've been happily manoeuvring my private conveyance with a clear conscience. Now what I do, I keep a thing called a Freeman folder always in the car, and it's got all the acts that I'm claiming rights under and all the rest of it. And since I did this, I've also deregistered my camper van that I now live in. So I've done it on 2 and the same result, and there's been no follow-up. So I would stand here and say this works, okay, based on my experience. And I would, you know, I think we should all stop paying tax, basically. Now, I just want to show you quickly, and these are all on the website, what I keep in the car, all right? So I keep a large copy of my exempt from levy notice, which I'll show you in a minute. I carry a notice to peace officers, so I give that to the copper when he stops me. It's got my fee schedule in there, how much I'm going to bill him if he detains me unnecessarily. And it's got a glossary of all the legal terms, so he knows I know what I'm talking about. And I've got a copy of the notice I sent to the DVLA and my, you know, your MOT and insurance. So that proves your common law compliance. So this is the notice exempt from levy. So that goes in the window where the tax disc was. And it just explains that it's a private conveyance, it's the private property of a free man, it's outside the jurisdiction of the UK state at war, and that notice has been served explaining that the state is breaking international law and various other laws through its illegal wars and occupations abroad, and that anyone paying tax is complicit, blah, blah, blah. There you go. Job done. I've got my notice to peace officer, explains all that, and again, just have a look on the website. I won't go through it now. I got my fee schedule, which is charged in sterling silver coin. So being restricted is £500 an hour. You know, you can put what you like on it. And the point is, we don't really expect them to pay, but it just puts you back in control, and it shows them that you know what you're talking about. I also got my glossary of terms, which actually explains what a police officer is. And it's actually defined as a peace officer. So a police officer is there to keep the peace, that's all. And then, basically, I want to sing a song, what I wrote. Yeah. How's that? Right, this is called No Tax for War, and it's based on everything what I've told you about so far, right? I went marching on a demo down in London. There must have been about 1 million people or two, all carrying a load of banners and slogans, and all shouting, hey, we know what you're planning to do, but we ain't had a referendum, and you weren't elected for this, and using tax for a tax on Iraq is just taking the piss. And so I'm telling you, no tax for war. You can stick your tax up your cracks, your government whores. I said no tax for war, 'cause the debt is what you're fighting for, boys. So I ain't paying no more. But in they went to find the weapons of mass destruction. Everybody knew the story was falling apart. Still illegally a military occupation. They killed the same amount of people that went on the march. And we still haven't seen Bin Laden. Oh yeah, they murdered him in Pakistan. The CIA were funding him as a US government bogan. And so I'm telling you, no tax for war. You can stick your tax up your cracks, your government holes. I said no tax for war, 'cause the debt is what you're fighting for, boys. So I ain't paying no more. Then I was stopped by a cop called Phil one Sunday, based on a true story, as you've just seen. He said, I stopped you 'cause I couldn't see your tax on display. And so I showed him my MOT and insurance, and the notice that I sent to the DVLA. 'Cause the government slaughter's illegal, so paying taxes against the law. 'Cause they put it in a great big pot to fund the banks as a war. And so I'm telling you, no tax for war. You can stick your tax up your cracks, your government holes. I said no tax for war, 'cause the debt is what you're fighting for, boys. So I ain't paying no more. Yeah, I said no tax for war. I'm gonna stick my cash in a stash under the floor. I said no tax for war, 'cause the debt is what you're fighting for, boys. So I ain't paying no more. I said the debt is what you're fighting for, boys. So I ain't paying no more. No more! Cheers. That's on the website as well. Right, I quickly want to get into what we can do about all this. If none of this protest works, contest the whole system. What I want to run you through quickly is what your inalienable natural rights are. Okay. So if you look in the law book, a natural right is a right that's conceived as part of natural law, right, and it's therefore thought to exist independently of rights created by government or society. Okay. So such as the right to life, liberty, and property. So it's very clear you have the right to those things, irrespective of the government or being a member of society. And an inalienable right is one that cannot be transferred or surrendered, especially a natural right. Okay, so they can't be taken away from you by anyone. Then you've got human rights, and these are the freedoms, immunities, and benefits that have been agreed at an international level for all human beings to claim wherever they live. Okay, and that's all in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So they're not rights given by society or the state, they're rights you're all born with. We're all born with. Excuse me. And all we have to know is what our rights are and how to claim them. So you all need, I would suggest, you can download this on the website as well, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been in existence since 1948. And if you're going to carry a driver's license and any form of ID, I suggest you carry this as well. Okay, so it tells in black and white what your rights are. It's based on things like the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence in America, and the French Rights of Man after the Revolution. So it's all about rights of people, not persons. Now what I've done is done a couple of charts which saves you reading like millions of words in the book. So your natural rights, you have a right to life, you have a right to liberty, which is natural liberty. So you can act as you wish, only restrained by nature. And it says in the book, you partly give that up on entering society. Okay? Now, liberty is defined in this book as free from external restraint, and it says especially by government. If you read it, that's what it says. So you have the right to be absent of the legal duty imposed on the person, and that's what it says as well. Check it out. You have the right to engage in the common occupations of life and enjoy privileges under common law, which are acquire useful knowledge, marry, establish home, raise children, and worship. Okay, and you have the right to contract with others. So that's your liberty, irrespective of government. You also have a natural inalienable right to property, which is defined as chattels and land. And chattels can be real, fixed things like trees and plants and buildings, or personal, mobile things like horses and equipment. And the land, you're entitled to what is called a tract of land, which is a parcel of land. So, when you're born, you have the right to go out, claim a piece of land, and build your homestead on it. It doesn't say anywhere that you have to pay anyone anything for that. Okay. So if you look at a homestead, this is a legal term, and it's the house, outbuildings, and adjoining land owned and occupied by a person or a family. So it can be a corporation or a family as a place of residence. So I suggest you build one for your family. And it says, as long as the homestead doesn't exceed in an area or value the limits fixed by law. So as long as you're not greedy, it is exempt from forced sale for collection of a debt. So if the state or whoever claims you have a debt, they cannot take your house to clear that debt. The only way they can do that is if it's got a mortgage on it. So there's another big plus for not getting a mortgage. So a free man needs a free homestead, land. You might want to grow some crops. You might want to raise some animals, chickens and stuff like that. And basically, you don't want to be paying any rent or any mortgage, because that means you have to work a lot harder to get more money to pay all the interest on it all. Whereas if you just pay what you're entitled to for your natural rights, all you've got to do is pay to build your house. That's all. Pay the labor and materials of your house. So, how long have we got time-wise, please? 15, all right. Now, I want to run you through what I call the land scam, okay? And this is really, really, like, crucial to the whole thing. So, please check this out. But this goes back to 1066, surprise, surprise. A guy called William the Conqueror. Now, the reason he's called Conqueror is because conquérir is a French law term, meaning to acquire. And it's the first person who acquired land by purchase, one who first brought an estate into a family. And it says, see, conquest. All right, so William the Conqueror first brought the British Isles, his estate, into his family in 1806, and it's been inherited by his royal descendants who still occupy the territory to this day. I'm going to show you how that works now. So if you look at conquest, it says an act of force during a war where a sovereign entity is trying to extend its territory. And it says the acquisition of land by any method other than descent, especially by purchase. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, what it goes on to explain is that purchase, what we call purchase in terms of buying things, the feudists call conquest. So William the Norman entitled himself Conquestator, signifying that he was the first of his family who acquired the crown of England, and from whom, therefore, all future claims by descent must be derived, okay? Now, this is why they say possession is 9/10 of the law, because the other 10th is the crown. It's not possible in this country to actually own land. It goes on to say, even more clearly, this name of conquestor is a title which, however just it was with regard to the crown, okay, which is the corporation soul that claims the territory, the conqueror never pretended to have with regard to the realm of England. He never had that. This is what it says in the book. So although he claimed the title of the crown, he never had claim to the actual realm, the actual earth, okay? So as far as the realm goes, the royal family's claim to all the land of England and then their subsequent takeovers of Wales, Scotland and Ireland is bogus. So we as free people can dispute the claim. It's all it is no one's disputed it. Someone's claimed something and no one's counterclaimed it. That's all that's happening. And what's happened since then is we've had massive enclosure of the common land. So in 1066 you had people called freemen. They were freemen and they had land and they farmed it and they didn't pay tax to anyone. Since then, we watched a great program last night about the Doomsday Book. The thing that sealed all this was the Doomsday Book, where William the Conqueror put in writing his claim to all the land of England. And since then, all the common land has been enclosed. I won't have time to go through all this, but check it out. This is on the website, and you can check all these things yourself. But basically, by 1872, did you know there was a second Doomsday Book done in 1872? No, I didn't get taught that in school either. But what that finally did was formalize land possessions, and they're only possessions, not ownerships. There's a difference. There's only now 4% of the country classed as common land, whereas it used to be 100%. So that's what's happened over the last 1,000 years. And all it is we've just forgotten that we were, invaded and someone claimed all the land. So what we've got now is, sorry about this very corporate slide, but basically the bit in the red ring, as of 2001, the top 1% of the population had land holdings of 70% of the territory. So what that does is restrict the supply of land, of course. So what you've got is private individuals and families owning, like I say, 70-odd%. You've got 12% urban, like cities and towns, 7% agricultural institutions, and then 8% forestry. But all the rest is owned by private, wealthy individuals. This is why the country feels overcrowded, all right? It's not overcrowded. This is why it feels overcrowded. 55 million people live in 11,000 square miles, and the other 6.2 live in 83,000 square miles. That's why it feels overcrowded. Fly over this country in a plane, look out the window, and you will see acres and acres of empty space. And this is why it feels crowded. So by the Crown giving land possessions to the gentry and restricting the availability of land for common people to build on, the price of land for building astronomically goes up, and everyone's crammed into small areas. So if you live in a town or a city, there's nearly 5,000 of you per square mile. But if you're one of the people working the agricultural land, there's only 12 of you per square mile. It's okay? And the gentry are sitting on all of the rest of that land. The other thing that's happened is hardly anyone works the land anymore. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, most people worked the land and grew their own stuff. But even if we look back past the war, you can see the decline in people working the land. And now there's actually twice as many farmers as there is workers working on farms. So again, it's all being consolidated into small, less and less hands. And only less than 2% of the population now actually work on the land, whereas it used to be the majority. Now, if you've got a freehold on a land or property, it's not ownership, okay? So freehold is an estate in land held in fee simple, fee tail, or a term for life. The second two are to do with inheritance. If you look up fee simple, this says an interest in land being the broadest property interest allowed by law, and it says it's the nearest approach to ownership of the land itself. So it's not actually ownership, but it's the closest thing to it. So it's a holding, a possession, not an ownership. But what I suggest we all do is claim our acre, because if you look at the size of the UK and the number of people in it, there's actually an acre for everyone. So it's not overcrowded. Now, I'm not suggesting, we all have an acre each and get rid of all the national parks and the farms and stuff. I'm just making a point. I mean, even if we had half an acre each and kept half the country for farming and national parks, it'd be pretty sweet, yeah? Right. Now, last few slides. Dwellings. All I want you to take from this one is the green bit at the bottom. This is the 30% of people who actually outright don't pay mortgage or rent on their house. All the bits at the top are people paying rent and mortgage. These green ones at the bottom are the only ones not doing that. Now, if we have a look at the cost of land, right? Agricultural land is anywhere between $2,500 and $7,000 an acre, right? This was from Savills in Suffolk in December 2008. I think this was the average price. All right, so that's if you want to buy a bit of land to graze your sheep or, you know, grow some crops or whatever, this is the sort of money you're talking about. But what if you want to build a dwelling? It goes up to £1.2 million an acre because of the restriction of the land supply and because of the local authority planning permission process, which is all corrupt and perpetuates this position. Right, so if you want to dwell in on your, you've got your inalienable natural rights, you've gone out and claimed a bit of land, and you want to build a property on it, right? If you looked at buying the average house at the moment in the UK, it cost you 258 grand, right? And 100 grand of that would be land price. But if you built the same house yourself, the materials and labor would only cost you 75 grand. All right, so this is the difference between you claiming land, building your own house, and having to buy land and buy a property that's already in this market. So the massive difference. So right, if you're 20 and you save up till you're 35, you'll have enough for the deposit on the mortgage for the one on the left, right? Or you'll actually have enough to build the one on the right. So at 35, you could have a house for the rest of your life, all paid for, no mortgage, no rent. And this is the difference between those two scenarios. So if you buy the house on the left with a mortgage, over your lifetime you'll pay 640 grand. Whereas if you can build it on money you've saved, you'll pay 75. And that's why the system loves people buying houses and getting mortgages. Because what that means is you work for an extra 25 years, longer than you need to pay the interest on the mortgage to the bank. And whilst you're doing that, of course, you're paying tax. This is just, they get an extra £500,000 just from the mortgage bit without all the tax revenue. So they love it. Now, if we look at homeless people, right? There's about 600,000 people in the UK, and that equates to about 135,000 houses, right? So if you then look at empty space, there's 1.2 million empty houses, which includes empty homes and commercial space, the equivalent that could be converted into homes. So all we need to rehouse everyone who's homeless is 10% of the empty property to be filled up. Now you say, why is this very hard to do? Do you think 10%? I don't think so. But you ask, like, why is that happening then? And of course, you've seen why, because the system is all there to perpetuate the wealthy, the conflict and the debt, to keep everyone else working to pay for it all. But as far as this, if you do know someone who's homeless, or even yourself, you want to get a place, there's all these places empty. You can actually do that under the 1980 Local Government Planning Land Act, and just write to this minister. If you're aware of any land, you can get a list off the internet of where it all is, and you can put a claim in for it. And then if the claim goes through, they put it up for auction. So that's something, regardless of being a Freeman, you can do that under the statute process using your legal fiction. Okay, so that's why I've stayed in this protest phase. I'm keeping my legal fiction so I can use it when I want to use it, and choose not to use it when I don't want to use it. Okay, so the land scam. Basically, the Crown has claimed all the British Isles, and it's a bogus claim. It's deprived the people of their inalienable natural rights. Enclosures taken away all the common land, and then the Crown has allocated land to the nobles back in the day in return for military service, which means that the majority are living in cramped conditions and paying through the nose for their homes. Okay, and all the detail behind this is on the website. So a Freeman claims his acre and his inalienable natural rights, and saves for a self-built home rather than, buying one with a mortgage, or gets an existing property and does it up. Much better to save up for that than get a mortgage. And then what we all need to start doing is disputing the Crown's claim to right by conquest by going land ourselves, and people are starting to do this by land grabs and things like that. And I think Nolan may know a lot more about that than I do. But we need to also reclaim empty homes and public buildings. All right, so that's all I want to cover on all the Project Freeman stuff. I just want to leave you with a few thoughts, because I'm now working on a talk which is all about what we're really here to do, and the spiritual side of things, and how we can use this to get out of all this and do what we really should be doing, which is fulfill our heavenly mandate. So, conclusions of my couple of talks tonight. Freeman's all about being personally responsible and accountable and honourable to all, but it's not about a movement. Don't sign up to anything, don't register, don't join a new party, don't pay subscriptions, or it'll end up like the Judean People's Popular Front. Yeah, where's he's over there, you know. But it's what I call individual collectivism, and if we all send notices off, if we all gen ourselves up and send notices off, the system won't be able to cope with it. And if you take away its lifeblood, which is made up money, it won't function anymore. And then we can do something better. Neither a leader or follower be. So, you know, share ideas, but get stuck in and do it yourself. And work for yourself. Working for ourselves and our fellows is better than being employed. If you look up the definition of employment, it means you're being kept busy and occupied. So you haven't got time to do this kind of stuff. And all of this is a distraction from your true calling. You know, I believe we all come to the planet with a natural talent. We all have something to contribute. And if you don't know what yours is, it's the thing that when you do it, you live in the moment, you forget about everything else, and you find it naturally easy to do. And whatever that is for you, that's what I believe we should all be doing, not playing this game. So I understand this is a game, but I don't really want to play a game. I want to get on with my real life. Yeah. So you can use your knowledge of this Freeman stuff and how the system works to liberate yourself from it. That's all. I don't want to kind of forget everything I've told you about details and taxes and money and all that bullshit, right? You can look at that anytime you want on the website, but use it if you want to, by all means, to liberate yourself from it and do what you really want to do with your life. I'm trying to do that. I now live in my camper van in France, and live off my busking in the markets with my dog, and I'm happier than I ever was when I worked in the energy industry, earning 70 grand a year. So we can use this to free ourselves from all the dogma, but we mustn't get bogged down in the detail. It's another distraction from our true calling. So getting stuck into all this is another distraction, so don't fall for that one either. Don't just look for templates to avoid responsibility. There is some effort required. Read all the stuff on my website and everyone else's stuff. It's all out there. Take a bit of time out. Use it to liberate yourself. And discover your true calling and live in that light in every moment. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to play you one more song. How are we for sound? Is that right? Right. So I'm going to leave you with my song called Freeman, which I wrote about all this stuff. It's on the website as well, but download it, give it to all your mates, do what you like with it. It's all free, I don't care. But this is Freeman. That's not my name, I'm not your slave. I live by the moral law, and that's how I'll behave, with love and respect for my fellow man. I remind those of your kind, your statutes never can control the freeborn with their rules and their demands. For I will not stand under what I do not understand, 'cause I'm a free man on the land. everything I can. Though I may travel by the sea, I will not pour its contract law, your power over me. I want no part of your society. You overruled us freeborn fool to finally breaking free. My birth was registered, but my parents never meant for me to work my life for you, and I do not consent, 'cause I'm a free man on the land. And I'm doing everything I can to be a free man on the land. Your phony money, your twisted tongues, the corporate corruption of your cities fills my lungs. I see through your fiction, your Roman law. Now I'm wise, you capitalize so you can tax the poor. Submission, application, registration is not for me. Well, the planet is my country, and through all your dogma I can see, 'cause I'm a free man on the land. And I'm doing everything I can to be a free man on the land. I said free man. Free man. Free man. Free man. Free man. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Litmus is coming around with a hat. The reason being because we want to raise some funds for him, because he did a lot of travelling to get here from France. So please put a little donation in for Litmus, would you? That'd be really, really kind and wonderful. Thank you.